Hello, everybody, and welcome to Empower You. I'm your host, Janet Hickox, and I'm here with my co-host today, Roger Wetzel. Hello, Roger.
Hi, Janet. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks. Doing
Good.
great.
Good. And we're here today with our guest, Jordan MacLeod. How are you today, Jordan?
Good, Janet.
Hi, Jordan.
Hey, Roger. How you doing?
Good.
Now, the last time we talked to Jordan, we were talking about his book, New Currency, How Money Changes the World as We Know It. And today we're actually going to start with what is his upcoming book called Ego, Money, and Empire. Roger, you wanted to start today's talk with a quote from that new book. Please.
Yeah, I was, as I was reading this article, Jordan, something, I just wanted to share this because I think it's kind of really important in what you wrote. And you wrote, ego, money, and empire, the worldly vehicles, have an interdependent relationship where the maturation of any one of these areas can help loosen the grip of egocentricity within the others. Egocentricity and narcissism translate into arbitrary power and self-gain at the expense of others and the whole. As such, they are the cause of the vast majority of human suffering and problems. The more they are dissolved and approached with non-attachment, the more ego, money, and empire decentralize, dematerialize, and transform into powerful powerful objective tools of the self. Addressing our systemic problems from this holographic perspective holds the power to address the very real problems of our age that will never be resolved through the usual piecemeal, manipulative, and superficial approaches. And I think that was, when I read that, Jordan, it was a pretty powerful statement with regard to what you're talking about, what we talked about last week, and how important this whole conversation is to where we're heading collectively. And I'd like you to kind of maybe expand on that a little bit.
Sure. Where to start? I think, basically, that is the thesis of the book, which I'm writing now, and what you're talking about is an essay that I just wrote. And this is something that I've been working on for 10 years, and it's really trying to show how ego and empire are co-evolving vehicles. That one really represents the individual, functions at the individual level the way the other does at the collective level. And they're both essential. And the problem that we tend to have is that we tend to view these functions as sort of unspiritual, and we often we like to think that the tendency is to think that we're further ahead than we actually are. And I think that's especially true at the collective level where, war has been essentially the default for human nature since the dawn of time, as opposed to the exception. And when, the more that we're able to embrace these vehicles and look at them realistically and where we really are, then I think that we can actually move a lot faster in the development, our collective development and our personal development. And so, it's really about, a conscious effort of looking at where egocentricity is in our culture, and how it manifests individually, culturally, and systemically, and really identifying that so that we can work with it. And money, the way I view money is really, it's really a mediator between these two functions. And it's really born out of ego, and it really reinforces the collective ego. And the more, essentially they are interdependent. And the more that we individually work to evolve and to empower ourselves and to become more conscious of our shadow and also of our potential, the more that we can apply that to the collective, and essentially we can apply it to our relationship to money as well. And in doing so, it loosens, it does loosen the grip of egocentricity at the collective level, and ultimately in the monetary system. And so, that's essentially the view that I think we need to start thinking about, because we are entering a period where we're going to see massive change in the global monetary system and the global financial world. And it's going to be pretty noisy, and there's going to be a lot of, fear, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of vested interests lobbying for, our attention and for our basically our support. So I think it's really essential that we start to look at it and really be aware that we're talking about a different level, a new stage of human evolution that we really need to be focused on, and not just reacting.
Yeah, I was really intrigued by the title of this essay, or what will be the book, Ego, Money, and Empire. And it's an interesting combination of words put together. I don't usually think of money as an ego function, but so tell us more about what's that connection between those three terms for you as it relates to what you're writing in this book.
So, the way that I understand ego, and it's based on Jane Levenger's work and certainly others as well. But it's essentially a process, a mental process that helps us make sense of the world. It helps to create order, and it also, it's also an evolutionary vehicle. It's a worldly vehicle that mediates our understanding of the world. So taking, enormous complexity of our human perception of how things, of the world and all the stimuli, and actually starting to make sense of it. And so, as seeing it as an evolving vehicle, it really moves from an egocentric point of view of, really it is all about ourselves, our me, and that's really what we're identified with. And gradually, over time, and it could be decades in human evolution now, but it's taken millennia for this to happen in human evolution. We're talking, it's basically the loosening of the grip of that narcissistic point of view towards concern for others and concerns ultimately for the system as a whole, and our impact, the impact of our actions on the whole. And so that's essentially how I view it. And so it's really, it functions for looking after, not only making sense of the world, but also for our self-defense and for making sure that we have security and an ability to look after ourselves and our loved ones. And, that's essentially how we apply it to the collective level as well, in the form of empire. So it's not exactly a nation state. It's a collective, currently it's really a collective vehicle that transcends any nation. So, we might call it the American empire, based on Western institutions that are led by America, but they really are institutions that create order and security for a multitude of countries. And it's essentially designed, the way it is now, it's designed to promote democracy around the world, and to prosperity through economic trade. So, it's been unprecedented in its success. And obviously, it has limitations as well, which were, the more globalized we become and the more interconnected we become, the more those limitations are becoming obvious. So, we're talking about a pretty serious situation where, the global economy is about to transform beyond the leadership of any single nation state.
That's very true. We talked about a couple of the problems last week when we were talking about your first book, and it seems to be even moving forward. I didn't even realize until I was reading your new essay for the new book that the U.S. is actually, or that the International Monetary Fund is actually moving forward with a meeting starting this month or in May, to decide whether or not the dollar will remain the international currency. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and what's going on with that? And then how is that going to affect us in the global economy and the U.S.?
Sure. So just to clarify, it's not exactly what the meeting is more about whether the Chinese yuan will become a global reserve currency at the IMF. And so that's the decision that's currently being made. And that lobbying process and that review process happens every 5 years. So if you were to talk to, most experts or economists a couple of months ago, like literally even last month, they would have thought that was impossible to happen this year. And just recently, Europe, most European countries have come and endorsed the Chinese bid to do so, to join, to be accepted, excuse me. And it's really a question of whether America will relent to the process. They have veto power at the IMF. So what's currently being discussed is whether the IMF can actually dilute America's voting power at the IMF. And that's something that the G20 itself has endorsed and is looking at. So it's really a complicated process where, does America support Chinese the acceptance of the Chinese yuan in the global basket in the SDR, special drawing rights, or does it try to resist that process and then have it happen some other way where the IMF actually does an end around American veto power at the IMF?
So why would the U.S. want? The U.S. is the only one that's the reserve currency, right?
No. So at the U.S., okay. This is an important distinction, I think. So you really have two things. Like the American dollar represents about 65% of global trade, and so it functionally acts as a global reserve currency in the sense that most gold's priced in dollars, oil's priced in dollars. Most commodities are priced in dollars, and most trade happens in dollars. So it functions as a global reserve currency in that sense. It's a global currency. On the other hand, the global reserve currencies at the IMF, like the reserve currencies at the IMF, are currently the dollar, the yen, the British pound, and the euro. So it's basically a basket of 4 currencies, and the Chinese yuan would be the 5th. Mm. So it's a significant development because China is already arguably the largest economy in the world, and it's ascending. More than 1 billion people, and America is really has a special position in the global economy and the global geopolitical realm, where they have veto power over these institutions, and the dollar does get to function like a global currency. And there's benefits to that, and it really is what helps ground their leadership role in the international system. And so that anything that's conceded to the Chinese is a major blow to their special arrangement. And the question isn't really does this single thing make the Chinese yuan the new currency? And not exactly. What it is it's more of a really rapid erosion of power through multiple series of events, and this is a significant one. Other ones include the launch in September of of basically a Chinese interbank trading system that will compete with SWIFT. And SWIFT is something that all banks in the world use to exchange money, to trade money. And when China comes out with a competitor, the U.S. is going to lose a lot of leverage in their diplomacy because they're using this as a tool to basically threaten banks that don't cooperate with them in the fight against terrorism or tax evasion, and also they at a international level, for example, SWIFT just cut off Russian banks' ability to move money out of Crimea. So that's sort of in response to the increased aggression on the Russian side. So when you look at that, like half the world, when you look at the BRIC nations and the countries that are really working with the Chinese to create a new order, that certainly includes India and Russia, Brazil. You're talking about half the world, and that's a major. There's basically all of that trade that on this new system will happen in Chinese yuan as well. So it's conceivable that by September when this launches, yuan will be a global reserve currency at the IMF. The formal process happens in November, and this new banking system will really weaken U.S. diplomatic. It's a really core leverage tool they have, and if half the world does move to the Chinese system, the perception will be that China is rapidly on the ascent and America is in rapid decline. And that will instill significant concern over the future of the dollar and the ability of America to repay its debt, its financial obligation. It's no longer the currency. right now they're able to borrow in dollars and repay in dollars. So there's really no risk of going broke because you can always print more dollars to fund your liabilities.
Right, right.
But the minute that changes, where, whether that's to another national currency or to a basket of currencies, which I think is more likely, like I think what will actually happen is that people will lose confidence in the dollar and want to be repaid or do loans in the SDR, the special drawing rights basket that consists of these 4 or 5 currencies. And, when that happens, not only will the economic situation in America be precarious, but the geopolitical situation as well, and their ability to lead. And, they're obviously by far the strongest military force in the world. And when the financial aspect hits, the capacity to carry out those operations and to maintain geopolitical stability will be significantly weakened. So that, that impacts the Middle East, and, basically the ability to counter terrorism and threats against regional governments, and also in the East as well. So, Russia and their aggression basically all around them. So like all of those aspects, I think, we would expect to see much more instability, I guess, in the near term.
It's kind of a disturbing picture, actually.
I think so. I think that, I think in the, American leadership, in my view, is certainly a net benefit to the world. And the problem is they're really not leading right now. I think if you guys are familiar with the letter, I'm sure you are, the letter the Congress sent to Iran, I think that really symbolizes everything that's wrong right now with American leadership. It's exactly the same thing that's happening at the IMF. And, America, the administration actually led the negotiations to give the BRIC nations more power, and Congress refused to accept it. So that's what this is all about, is basically for 5 years, Congress has refused to adopt these reforms that really ensure American veto power and basically their leadership. And the fact that they've refused to do it has really emboldened the BRIC countries and even Europe with the frustration to just go and build these other alternative systems. So what's happening is that America isn't leading, and everybody else is just going on without them, and they're creating alternatives to being stuck with an ineffective Congress, basically. And so that that's all manifesting this year.
It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. I think one of my questions is what's so bad about, what's so bad about China's currency being one of the reserve currencies? I can already envision this, here in the US, we have an us against them perspective again in everything. And it's like, well, if this is going to be bad for the US, then screw those guys. And we're gonna stick to our guns, and we're not gonna relent. But shouldn't there needs to be some kind of common ground in this, I would imagine. Is that possible?
It's definitely possible, and I think that's what everyone is working towards. And the problem, I think, is that that's not happening. We just don't see that happening. And I think the new Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank, the AAIB, everybody's been talking about, and how Europe, how shocked America was when Europe and other allies went and they joined the Chinese bank, basically their development bank for the Asian region. And they were basically saying that there's no way you should join, talking to the UK, talking to Germany, talking to Australia, Japan, this bank, because China has veto power. And so it really is an us versus them mentality right now, where America is the superpower, and they're really hanging on to a unilateral status in the global economy and politically, and it's eroding pretty quickly. I think people like Henry, Kissinger, maybe 5, 6 years ago, maybe longer, he acknowledged that we're already in a multipolar world. And so that reality is really just starting now to sink into the financial system as well.
Great. Well, I want to take a short break here, Jordan, and when we come back, let's talk about what the U.S. should do and how we can affect a favorable outcome. Okay?
Sure.
All right.